The guys are just going to go and grab a quick sandwich. They'll be back in a little bit and we'll play a bit more for you at the end. But I'm Simon Cox, this is Matthew Knight, and we're the artistic directors of Septura, who will tell you a little bit about the group and answer any questions you may have for the next sort of half hour or so before they come back. So, as you can see, Septura is a brass septet, which in classical music is a new formation for brass chamber music. The group was launched eight to 9 years ago, and this is our fourth trip to America. We were here back in October as well, doing the same program. It's our first time in Oregon, so we're very excited to be here. Why don't you tell them a bit more about the ethos of the project?
Yeah, so basically the project started because we were all playing in orchestras in London. Simon was actually in an orchestra in Finland, in Helsinki. And we all love playing in orchestras. It's great, it's really exciting at times. But I don't know if any of you are brass players who played in an orchestra. You will find that there are some times when amazing things are going on in the orchestra and you're just sitting there counting bars rest. And so we began to get a little bit frustrated, and we thought we'd really like to play some chamber music. We're all classically trained musicians, so the kind of chamber music that we wanted to play was classical, and we had this idea to set out to try and prove that brass instruments are as capable as any other instruments of playing serious classical music. So, like, comparable to a string quartet, for example. In London we have a hall called the Wigmore Hall, which is the kind of home of chamber music in the UK. So our ambition was always to get into the Wigmore Hall, and I'm pleased to say we now have a kind of regular annual concert there. They've kind of accepted us. That before that they were a bit snooty about whether brass instruments could play in such a refined acoustic. So the thing is, as Sam said, the formation for classical music is actually new. It's not a new formation full stop, because it is, of course, the brass section of the symphony orchestra. But for chamber music, it was kind of new. So we had a bit of a problem at the beginning. We actually, before we'd done any concerts, we were lucky enough to get a kind of record deal with a label called Naxos, and they wanted us to do 10 discs for them. And the problem was that we didn't have any music to record. We didn't have any repertoire at all. So it was actually the boss of Naxos who had the idea that each disc should focus on a particular period and genre and group of composers. So each disc is very focused rather than being a kind of compilation album. And that was actually a really useful starting point for us, because through that process we began to build up this kind of imagined history of brass chamber music. We call it a counterfactual history. So we're asking ourselves, what if the great composers of the past had actually written for brass? So we started with 19th century choral and organ music, Brahms, Bruckner, who else was it? Mendelssohn and Schumann on the first disc, and then the second disc was Baroque theatre music, Purcell, Rameau, Handel, and Blow. John Blow. Anyone heard of John Blow? Yeah, the English composer wrote the first English opera. And then we moved on to Russian 20th century, Shostakovich, Prokofiev, things like that. And we've carried on since then. Now, how many have we done now?
We've released 9 discs, but 7 are from that kind of concentrated series, and 2 of them were Christmas CDs. The most recent one was released nearly 2 years ago. That was all music by Gershwin and Copeland. So we're performing some of that tomorrow in the programme. You'll hear a bit of Gershwin at the end. And yeah, so as I mentioned at the beginning, we're coming up towards our 10th anniversary. And it's always been an ambition of ours to commission lots of original music. We think that it's important for us to have this counterfactual history of repertoire, but it's, if anything, more important that the brass septet has lots of original music by really respected composers. So that's becoming our kind of increasingly our focus. So we should be premiering a piece by Roxana Ponufnik, who's a very well-known British composer, at a 10th anniversary concert at the Wigmore Hall that Matt mentioned earlier. We're also performing tomorrow a piece called Time Out of Joint by Pete Walton, which is based on sort of themes from Hamlet, which I'll tell you a bit more about in the concert. So it's been really good to bring that on tour and give it plenty of performances around the States. We'll introduce the rest of the players when they arrive. We're quite lucky with SOU. We've got basically the best brass players in London who are members of the group, who seem to enjoy it enough to be willing to travel halfway around the world
But we're all in different orchestras in London, and sometimes it's quite difficult scheduling wise. So you may notice, I don't know if you have any favourite brass players, but you may notice that not all of us are here. So we actually have a squad of 10 players, or 11 players. And we only have 7 on stage at any one time. So we kind of have like a spare of each instrument, which is basically the only way we could make it work. And even then, it's sometimes quite tricky to get everyone together at the same time. So
yeah, I mean, as you saw, we're rehearsing today because basically the easiest way to rehearse was to get everyone out here in the same place, and then we could have a rehearsal. In some ways, it's easier than rehearsing in London. We're doing another programme later in the tour of all Russian music by Prokofiev and Shostakovich and Mussorgsky's Pictures and Exhibition. So I think on Monday morning in St. Louis we have a rehearsal there for that programme as well. So that's kind of how we get around the scheduling problem. So I think that's a good overview of who we are and what we do. So yeah, if any of you have any questions, hopefully you do, fire away. Yes?
This is kind of random. You guys travel with really expensive instruments on planes a lot. Have they ever been damaged?
I think we've managed to escape damage free so far, but we're constantly terrified. Yeah. So the tuba has to have its own seat on the plane, and whenever he arrives, so we flew into San Francisco yesterday and then flew up to Medford, and I was with him when he brought the tuba to security, and they were just looking at him like, well, there's no way you're going through, like it doesn't fit through the machine, you know. And they're all having a meeting about it and stuff, and it's like, well, he's got to get it through, like we've got to come and do this concert. So that, you know, it always works out in the end.
It's always a bit of a worry with the trombones. We don't normally have a seat for trombones, so we just take them on the plane with us, but a few times it's been a bit difficult. We went to New Zealand a couple of years ago, and we flew into Auckland from London, and then we got on a tiny plane to go to the South Island, and there was no way the trombones were going to fit in the overhead lockers, but they let us just have them between our legs actually on that occasion, which I think probably breaks.
Well, to be fair, they didn't see it.
They may not have seen it. We were sort of reading a newspaper over the top of it.
We had one thing, I think it was in Lithuania or Latvia or somewhere like that. You know, we'd had a real problem at check-in. They were like, oh, you can't take these on, kind of thing. And normally we hide them at check-in, the instruments, and then just bring them to the gate, and it's normally fine. But we got to the gate, and they were stopping everybody. They were like, no, you've got to check that in. All of the bags were having to go in the hold. And I think at one point, 2 of them turned their backs, and the 3 of you just went straight on the plane, and they didn't realise. So,
But the thing is, I am always kind of quite glad. If you play the trombone, the good thing about that is I think it is probably the cheapest instrument to play. So if it did get written off, it's only a couple of $1,000 or something, you know. It's not like having a priceless violin or something. So it's not the end of the world.
Mm.
There's a question at the back.
Have you ever been to Spain?
Spain?
Yeah.
Yes,
we have. We played in a very small village. We played at Tubular Brass Week. I think it was in late 2018. I think it was in northeast Spain. Yeah, but I can't remember the name of the town. But yeah, we have. Hopefully we'll go back in future. Oh, cool. Yeah. Well, we Spain's always...
There's actually a very strong brass tradition in Spain, and lots of very good brass players in jobs in Europe come out of Spain. So it'd be good for us to go back there more often. They've got too many good players of their own, I think. Yes, go for it.
Why specifically these 7 instruments, not a variation of, say, for instance, the French horn?
Yeah. So it was a mixture of reasons. So when I sort of had the idea to start the group, I'd kind of quite enjoyed playing in quintets, but I much preferred playing in orchestras because of the kind of choir-like sound that the brass can make. So I decided I wanted to kind of bring that idea to brass chamber music. I feel like the quintets sometimes it can be very versatile, but sometimes I find there's too many different instruments for 5 players, if that makes sense. And yeah, the horn was something I wrestled with for a while. Obviously, the horn's a wonderful instrument, but it does sound quite different to trumpets and trombones, especially. You know, it has a funnel mouthpiece, a conical bore, and you play with your hand in the bell. And I thought that, you know, the real strength of the horn would be to have several horns to get that kind of section sound that sounds so great in the orchestra. But I think we just end up too big then. So those things were all considered, but at its most basic, it's just the orchestral brass section. So I think, even though it's new, it's historically one of the most written for groups of brass instruments. I mean, every significant composer from about Wagner onwards has basically written for brass septet, albeit within the orchestra. So I think it's a really proven formation. So that's basically where it came from.
And I mean, what we're trying to do with the arrangements, all the arrangements we do, we're trying to find as many colours as possible. We don't necessarily try to exactly copy the original or recreate the sounds of the original, but certainly the range of colours in the original. So we use lots of different mutes and that kind of thing, and obviously all the different instruments. So we have 2 B-flat trumpets, an E-flat trumpet, and sometimes he plays the piccolo as well. Occasionally we'll use flugelhorn, sometimes we'll use euphonium or small trombones or that kind of thing. We're trying to create as many different colours as possible, but also we want to be able to have the option of having that very homogeneous sound. I mean, you heard a bit in the Finzi, quite that kind of organ-like homogeneous sound is something that I think this combination of instruments is able to achieve quite well. Yes?
I have 2 questions, if that's okay.
That's fine.
First of all, who's writing your music? Do you commission composers?
So it's mostly been arrangements that we've done so far, which me and Matt have done. But yeah, as I said, we're commissioning more music. It's just extremely expensive. And yeah, you know, post-pandemic and stuff, there isn't as much money as there was, and there wasn't even that much before because of the you know, recession and everything. So it can be tough to raise the money, but yeah, we'll keep plugging away.
Yeah. Also, so I noticed you're very arch. I know brass instruments. I'm a clarinetist, and I know that brass instruments are much more directional. Is there a reasoning for being so arched like that?
I think in the concert we might.
Yeah, this is sort of our rehearsal setup. In the concert, first of all, we will be standing up rather than sitting down, because basically we think that it's much easier to communicate kind of physically as a group, both with the audience and with each other, if you have the freedom of being standing up rather than sitting down. But the lads sort of would moan non-stop if we made them stand up for the whole rehearsal. So for the rehearsals we sit down, for the performances we'll stand up. But yeah, we will probably be a bit, now that you pointed out, we're very much like facing each other. We will be a bit more opened out for the concerts.
There's always going to be a bit of compromise because you have to be able to see each other to communicate. But yeah, I mean, one point to make is that the reason the E-flat trumpet goes there is because it's smaller, and you know, whenever it's playing, it kind of has the lead line, so it points out more. So hopefully the balance improves because of that.
But you are right that the brass instruments are so directional, and occasionally we're able to use that to our advantage. So we have done in the past a few things where a soloist kind of steps out from the group, and it's actually amazing how much different, if you have, you know, a trumpeter or a trombone player playing here and the group behind them, it's amazing how much differentiation you get in the sound just from having someone pointing forwards and a little bit further forwards on the stage. Yes?
No, sorry.
Oh, sorry.
Have you done any arrangements of like Mozart wind serenades or organ music?
We have done organ music. We haven't done the Mozart wind serenades.
I did look at them for a while. We will do a disc of. We hope to do a disc of Mozart, Haydn, and Beethoven at some point, but likely to be more focused on string quartets. We think. I think sometimes with music that already contains wind instruments, I think, and some of those pieces contain horn. I think, if I'm right. It's sort of almost, the sound was perhaps already a bit too close to us for us to feel like we can convincingly translate it.
But also, are they 13 wins? Is it some of them?
There's an octet, there's 13 wins.
Yeah. So I mean, we have to be very careful with, and there's lots of stuff where when we're coming up with a recording or whatever, and we're coming up with a repertoire to do, we bat things back and forward, and there's lots of stuff that we would like to do that we end up rejecting because we don't really want them to sound like arrangements. We don't want them to sound like kind of poor versions of the original, and particularly we have to be careful about the number of parts. One of the things, obviously, with brass instruments compared to string instruments or singers or piano or whatever, that we have to be careful about is stamina, and that's quite a big concern. Stamina and breathing and things like that. So, generally it's more. Obviously, the bigger the original in terms of number of players, the more difficult it is to squeeze it into 7 players without either losing something or making it very, very difficult for everyone to play and very tiring. So we're kind of balancing those things, and often there are things that we would like to do that we end up rejecting for those kind of reasons.
I have a bunch of questions, but I guess one of the most important ones I think is along your musical journey. What are some of the things that have helped you stay inspired? Actually, does that make sense? Or are there things that have gotten in the way as far as becoming a career, playing the same things over and over again, perhaps?
Well, I think that's the main point. I think it's variety that seems to keep things fresh. I think this group's a really important thing for all of us because it's not a full-time job. We all have other things that we do, and this is one of the things we really look forward to because we find it really sort of interesting artistically. But I think if we were doing this every day of the year, we probably would then crave something. Yeah.
I mean, one of the great things about being a musician in London is that there's lots of stuff going on. So we're all, we're all self-employed. So we're in self-employed orchestras. So we only get paid when we play. But the beauty of that is that we have freedom to do lots of different things. So all of the guys in this group play in orchestras, but also will do film sessions and pop sessions and whatever, and maybe a bit of solo stuff and groups like this. So there's like a load of variety, which basically keeps it interesting and exciting. The downside of our model is that when we don't play, we don't get paid, which means when there are things like global pandemics, it's quite problematic. So yeah, we had a bad couple of years, but luckily now it seems to be bouncing back, so that's good. Yeah.
Once your group was formed, did you find any repertory that fit your personnel, or basically do you have to arrange everything?
We haven't done it. Did you find any?
I found one or two pieces, but didn't feel like they really fitted the programs we wanted to put together. So yeah, we had to arrange everything. So I mean, as Matt said, we recorded 2 CDs before we ever did a concert. And in the first concert, we had to perform pretty much all the music, we'd recorded. It wasn't a very varied program.
Well, it was 2 varied halves, but within the halves they were quite. It was actually it was a terrifying concert. We did our first concert at the Royal Academy of Music in London, and we had this big invited audience, and it was quite full of things. And we'd just done these 2 recordings, and we'd never done a concert before, so we were a bit nervous anyway. And then also we were just about to sign with an agent in the UK, and they were all coming to this concert and all this kind of stuff. So it was like a lot of pressure. Yeah, it seemed to go okay. There's actually some clips of it on YouTube, and it sounds alright. So we got away with it.
Yeah.
As far as the process with you choosing music and thinking, okay, maybe I want to do this, and then bringing it to the rest of the group, and then thinking about arranging, how long does all that take?
That kind of depends. So it's not that lengthy because basically we tend to make the decisions on what we're going to play, and then before we don't discuss that with the group. The first they see of it is the almost finished arrangement. Then they complain loads that it's way too hard, and then we tweak it and carry on working on it that way. I think if we work flat out on the arrangements, most of them would take about 2 weeks, but that would be kind of...
Yeah, at the beginning, the thing is, at the beginning it was a very quick turn because we were doing 2 recordings a year, so we were having to, come up with 60 minutes of music thereabouts every 6 months. So it was kind of quite full on. Now it's a little bit more relaxed. We're not recording so regularly, and also, but we do arrangements just for concerts, not necessarily for recordings as well. So there's still a bit of pressure.
Yeah.
But
the process was quite intense in those early days.
It also varies a lot to do with the music. I mean, if you do at the beginning we did some core stuff. That's actually quite easy to arrange for brass, and it doesn't take too long. Even though we're quite specific about trying to get as much of the articulation of the core stuff into our parts. So we have got a whole kind of system of articulations that the players kind of had to learn what we meant by various things. But we also do, for example, An American in Paris, which, that was a lot of work to do that. It's a much more complex kind of thing. There's tempo changes, basically every 2 bars or whatever, and but we kind of have a process where usually if it's a big piece, we'll split it up between the 2 of us, and we'll each do a half, and then we'll send it to the other one, and then we'll have loads of comments, and then we'll play it through with the group. They'll say it's too high, take it down the tone, so we generally do that. And then, a few kind of, even right up to recording, we might be changing the odd thing, changing music, whatever, that kind of thing. So it kind of, and actually then even in performance, they kind of grow and develop, and we might change the odd bit here and there. So,
I mean, the main thing we want to happen at the end, and hopefully you'll agree after the concert tomorrow, is that the pieces sound like they were originally written for brass. So selecting it, what to arrange is quite a sort of important part of the process. And we have to often reject lots of pieces that we like, but just we aren't convinced we're going to make work. Whether say that we have a theme for a concert or a CD. Say we're going to perform all Russian music, and we want to find a piece by Prokofiev. There's not really a sort of easy way to do it. You just have to start working your way through his repertoire, and sometimes you'll find loads of stuff that works. And I've spent hours and hours listening to music and not found anything in the past. So
the other thing that happens is if music's in copyright, you have to get permission from the publishers to do it. And we've had a few interesting experiences with that. I mean, there was a Poulenc piece that you arranged, I think, that was arranged, and then basically they said, no, you can't do it. And then we had also a slightly hairy experience with this Prokofiev piece, which we were going to record. And first of all, we went on the radio in the UK to do it. And I think it was about the day before we were going to do this radio broadcast. We still hadn't actually got permission from the publisher to do it. And then it just came in time, didn't it? So, yeah. Yes.
So you guys have done 7 of your kind of themes records. What are your ideas for the other 3?
Well, we've got too many. That's the problem.
Yeah.
I mean, we definitely want to do a Bach disc at some point. That's got to be done. As Simon said, we want to do Mozart, Haydn, Beethoven, string quartets.
One obvious thing that's completely underrepresented in certainly in what we've put out there is female composers as well. So that's going to be a sort of priority for our next CD, I think. When we came to the States in 2020, we performed the Clara Schumann Sonata in G minor that worked really well. It was extremely popular, and we actually performed that on our debut at the Wigmore Hall as like the main piece we played. But I think we'd like to record that. Obviously, I mentioned the commission by Roxana Panufnik that's coming up as well. That's a really important thing for us to
You need to tell us if it sounds like that. The main one we did so far, we did the Shostakovich 8th Quartet, which we'll play later on this tour actually. And I said to Simon, I've got this great idea, we're going to do Shostakovich 8th Quartet, and he said, no, that's a terrible idea, we're definitely not doing that. Anyway, I kind of badged him, and then eventually we did do it. And we think it's quite successful. It's not exactly like the original. I think it's got a slightly different feel. A lot of I think brass instruments are actually better at some things that maybe Shostakovich had in mind. Some of the aggression of the second movement, for example. Some of the brutality of that piece. I think it's easier for us to do than four-string players. But then, the more intimate moments are probably more difficult for us to do. So it's a kind of balance. But I think the thing is that it's not that we're trying to create exactly the same thing or completely reproduce it. We're trying to have our own take on it, but just that it sounds hopefully like it was originally written for us.
I mean, I think the two main areas that we have to be careful of with arranging string music and piano music is the figuration, so just the kind of the way the notes are laid out and whether or not we can do that, because we can't play notes as quickly as you can, basically. And the ranges, so very high violin writing is a bit of a struggle, so often we use mutes and play things down an octave, because certainly on the piano, I think there's a strong argument for saying that a lot of the reason for, or the primary reason for things being written in specific octaves is actually colour of sound. Rather than the specific need to hear those actual notes at those frequencies. So mutes, I think, can create the same kind of effect. We use them a lot in the Shostakovich especially.
And the piano, of course, throws up its own issues, because the sustain pedal is a very difficult thing to kind of recreate. So we did a load of Debussy preludes, and we had to work very hard to sort of listen actually to recordings of pianists playing the originals and listen to what it sounded like rather than what it looked like on page. How long are these notes actually sustaining? Like, when does the attack and the decay happen? How can we translate that into brass? And it was quite tricky, but hopefully it worked in the end. Yes?
Hi there. I brought my students
Hello.
from Ashland Middle School.
Hi.
These are all my brass players, most of my brass players. And we're a room full of musicians. And I'm wondering, in your country, do you have good public education for band, like we do? And how did you choose your instrument? Get started? What were you like in middle school? And how did you know, you can get to this echelon?
I think, well, first of all, the public provision for music education in the UK is not good. What a lot of our members grew up through was the brass band movement, which is still very strong in the UK, particularly in the north of England. And that's a kind of more sort of community-centred thing, or at least historically a more community-centred thing. And that's where lots of British brass players come up through that tradition, playing in bands, doing contests, all that kind of thing. I personally, I don't know that much about it, but that's certainly where a lot of these players came from.
We're always amazed when we visit an American school at the facilities and just how many people are involved in band music. It's fantastic. So yeah, keep it up.
How old were you when you started?
I think I was 8 years old. My dad played a bit of trumpet, so when they announced in school that we could start taking lessons, I signed up. And I think, there's a sort of most local authorities in the UK have youth bands and youth orchestras. So most people who are learning start to move through that system, and that can then lead on to things like national youth orchestras, and that's perhaps around the age where you start to think about whether you might be able to or want to do it professionally.
So Matt and I met in the National Youth Orchestra of Great Britain. It must be almost getting on for 20 years ago, was it?
Yeah.
And now we play in the same orchestra, so we see far too much of each other.
Does anyone here go to private schools in the UK that are specialist music schools. So a couple of our members went to those schools at like quite a young age. So they're kind of in that kind of system aimed at being professional musicians for a long time, probably a bit too long.
Yeah.
So I'll introduce the rest of the players, shall I? So this is James Fountain. He plays trumpet. He's principal trumpet of the London Symphony Orchestra. He's also recently been announced as a Bach artist, which we're all very excited about. I'm sure he'd like to talk to you about that. This is Aaron Okugbo. He's a very in-demand freelancer in the UK. He's a bit younger than the rest of us, but we're really enjoying having him with us. Sasha Kushalali, who's also one of the leading freelancers on the London scene. Dan West, bass trombonist, likewise one of the leading bass trombonists around. And Matt G, who's principal trombone of the Royal Philharmonic Orchestra. He also plays as a soloist quite a lot, Matt. You can see from the fact that he decided not to wear his polo shirt that he thinks of himself as the specialist. We'd be very happy to chat to you afterwards.
Is there a city in the world that can match London for professional orchestras? There are so many of such great quality. I think of New York with the New York Philharmonic.
Yeah.
That's it.
Well, but you guys over here, you tend to have like one big orchestra for your city, which in many ways probably works out better because it means that there's probably a better audience. In London, we have so many orchestras, and then the audience gets split between them. But London's a big city, and there's lots of demand. I think there's nowhere quite like it, as far as I'm aware. We look at other countries with a bit of envy about, for example, how their orchestras are funded and things like that. If you go to Berlin, there's quite a few orchestras in Berlin, and they all get a lot more money than our orchestras. But there's not the same kind of scene, and especially not the same freelance scene. Like I said earlier, a lot of these players, James and Dan and Matt especially, do a lot of film schools and that kind of thing in London. So there's a lot of stuff going on, and it's an exciting place to be a musician, I think. But yeah, as Matt mentioned, Berlin would be the place to. I think there might be more orchestras there than Ireland, but I'm not 100% certain. Pardon? Would you go to Madrid?
We should go to, yeah.
Sounds like a great idea.
Yeah, sounds very good. Just for a holiday, right?
You guys ever been to a country that you could speak the native language of?
We could. All of them. Well, we went in 2019. We went on tour to Japan, and none of us speak Japanese. And our agent out there, who was sort of promoting some of the concerts, said to me and Simon, "Oh, we'd like you to speak to the audience in the concert." We said, "Great, yeah." We always speak in our concerts. We introduce the pieces, we introduce the players, that kind of thing. So we said, "Yeah, that's absolutely fine. How do you want it to work? Should we write down what we're going to say, and then you give that to an interpreter or whatever?" And he said, "No, we want you to speak in Japanese." I said, "Well, we don't speak Japanese." So he said, "Don't worry, just write down what you're going to say, and we'll write it out phonetically for you." So we had to stand up there in front of the group, and they didn't take this. We were saying, "Watashi wa septura, Matthew Knight-san," all this stuff. No idea what we were saying, and all I know is that in the bit that I'd sent, there wasn't, to the best of my knowledge, a joke. But every night the audience laughed at one particular point. So I had no idea if I was saying completely wrong or if they had just written in something funny for me. So it seemed to go down okay. Yeah?
How many different languages have you had to learn to speak like in concert?
Oh, to be honest with you, usually we speak, well, it depends where we go. If you go to somewhere in Scandinavia, everyone speaks English almost as well as we do. So we can just speak English to the audiences. And other times we've had a translator. So yeah, we unfortunately haven't really learned any languages to help talk to audiences yet. But maybe one day.
The most important language for what we do is Latin, because we do a lot of things that were written in Latin. And if you play a vocal piece, for example, it's very important to understand what it's actually about, what the words are saying, even when you've got a line in something. So, I'm always boring the players with bit of Latin.
¿Puedo hablar español?
I'm learning, but I understood what you said. I just can't answer it. Great. Well, so we have a little bit of Gershwin to play now. So we're going to play the second and third movements